Today you'll learn 5 essential production techniques taken from tech house legend Sassari. My name is Massimo, I'm a DJ and producer from Berlin, and I'm super excited to be back on the PML channel. For you, I took a deep dive into Sassari's tracks to filter out some of his production techniques that I'm gonna show you right now. Let's get started. Okay, first lesson is going to be our drums. We're gonna choose a part where we can hear all of the drums and all of the elements play together. Let's have a quick listen. First off, most important element in dance music is our kick drum. Typical for Sassari is that we have kicks that, even though it's tech house, they are quite heavy hitting. Let's have a listen to our kick. So quite heavy kick. We start off with this really nice PML tech house sample, which by itself already sounds really good. However, we've added some processing, so it's just an EQ8 with the low end roll off that is activated whenever needed, and a tiny bit of overdrive just to make that kick sound present and still sound a bit dirty. Okay, so moving on to our second kick layer, which you would think, why would you need a second kick layer? This is creating a lot of the groove in the low frequencies. What's happening here is we've got an instance of Serum that uses a rumble kick preset, which is then played in a rhythmic pattern that gives it a lot of groove. So you get that typical feel of alternating rhythms, which keeps it interesting, and not just with the notes, which in this case we have some 16th notes that accentuate the groove, 16th notes that on top are shifted to the back a little bit, and this is how you create swing. Next up we got our clap. We got a clipper working for us to tame some of the loudness right here, which is set to digital clip and then cuts off some of the loudest parts of the clap to keep our gain staging clean and have some headroom for the final mix and master. Then we've got a snare, which is high and low passed, which we can see right here. We cut out a lot of the frequency spectrum to focus on the mids. And this snare is placed right in front of the actual clap happening and 1/16th note before that. So it gives it a little bit of a feel, together with our other clap, of being a pre-shifted clap. Next up we go to our cymbal section. We get different layers. One head, which is just short and pointy, which would be our closed hi-hat for the transient that really comes through, which is also EQ'd a little bit. One resonance was cut out and some of the very high frequencies were also rolled off. Then we've got a second layer, which sits a little bit behind the original and is a lot longer than the closed one. So this would be our open hi-hat. Then we've got a third layer of hi-hat, which is used to emphasize some of the higher frequencies. And lastly, we got a shaker loop, which also has our 16th note pattern. We've got some LFOs that are automated to the start of the sample. When you load up a new instance of LFO, it will give you a button right here, which you press, and then you link it to the parameter that you want to be automated. So in this case, once to the start of the sample, so that gets pushed a little bit to the back, and also the decay, the length of the shaker. This is used to make it feel a little bit more alive, so we don't have the exact same sample playing over and over again in a 16th note pattern. Without and with Sounds a lot more like a real person actually using a shaker to create the sound. Let's move on to lesson number 2, which is our percussions and fills, which we use to keep the groove even more interesting and dynamic and feel alive. First off, we got this percussion loop taken from the sample pack. Just very minimalistic in the back. And then we got another one to complement that one. A quite simple and quite repetitive pattern, which in this case makes the groove feel a little bit more hypnotic. We see they complement each other, so we got one filling up the first 2 quarter notes and then the other one filling up the second 2 quarter notes. Next up, we got our crash, which is played at the very beginning of each 32 bar loop to make that drop sound a little bit more impactful. We've got a very strong focus on the high frequencies here, so the lows and the mids are filtered out quite harshly. But this is exactly what we need. And then you've got a delay afterwards to keep up the rhythmic pattern a little bit, adds to the rhythm by replaying the sample in a certain quarter note pattern right here, and also to give it some 3-dimensional feeling. Next up, we got this rim to finish off our section, to bring it to an end, which has a really interesting pattern, namely a triplet grid, which sometimes is used to break the pattern of just quarter notes and 16th notes. It's a different type of rhythm, so to say, so it kind of sticks out a little bit more when used. We've got a lot of EQing right here to boost some resonances in this case, to make it come through a bit more and also to make it sound a little bit more interesting. And some auto pan to make it even more dynamic, more 3-dimensional. Moving on, we've got a hit from our PML sample pack, which is quite an interesting sample. It sounds quite dark by itself, but having it placed on the 9th quarter note of this pattern also gives it that impact. And then lastly, we've got another tom loop with some quite low rumbling toms that complement the groove even more. So all together, so lesson number 3, we're finally going to look at our bass, which in this case consists of 2 different layers. We got a sub layer and a mid-range layer, and they both have their very important individual function. Let's have a listen to the whole thing. We can hear why these elements are important. The sub is just providing the bass that we hear on the dance floor, on the big systems in the club. And the other one, the mid-range, is important to give it a little bit more flavor. And the mid-range is important to also have our bass be audible on smaller systems and give it a little bit of flavor. Let's have a look at our sub. It's used with an instance of Serum with a rumble bass sub preset, which basically is just a mixture between a sine wave and a triangle wave. So it's not a completely clean, just one frequency that's put out, but we have some harmonics that are also adding to the presence of the bass. We can see this when we look at our EQ8. Not only have the sub, we also have some harmonics right here, which add to the flavor and the presence of the bass. Then we've got a shaper, which is just used to sidechain a little bit to duck down the volume every time the kick hits. And that's basically it for the sub. Now, when we look at the mid bass, this is where it gets quite interesting. In order to understand what's going on here, we have to look very closely at our notes. We have the sub, which revolves around the root note G. So this is the key of our track, it's G, and then we have some alternating notes that break this pattern, which are D and A sharp. And these notes all occur in the G minor scale. So we are in scale when we made the decision to use these notes for this pattern. Also, once again, we've got this D be shifted a little bit to the back within the groove of the track, so the bass also retains that laid back feeling. Moving on to our mid bass, now everything looks a little bit different because the note that is played right here is D and not G. Now, how can that be? It is inside the scale. It's just an extra layer that you can use, a frequency that you can dial in to give your bass more presence. Is that 7 semitones up or 5 semitones down harmonic. And now when we look at the serum instance that provides the mid bass, we see that we just have sine waves dialed in, and all a sine is just one frequency that is put out. In this case, the sub is providing the main frequency that is put out, which is in D. So altogether, we got our sub playing G and our mid bass playing D, which are both in scale and complement each other very nicely. And then when we have a closer look, we see that there's even more harmonics dialed in. The oscillator A is dialed 9 semitones up from the root note of the mid bass. However, that's not what matters. What matters is its relation to our sub, which provides the root note, and 9 semitones up from our D that is played in the mid bass brings us to the note B. If we play G, B, and D, we have a major chord. However, the track is written in a minor chord, and the minor chord would not have B, it would have B flat. Now, without getting too technical about it, what this does is it creates tension. It creates, so to say, an unresolved edge against the minor key center of the track, which is G minor. The last layer that is added is with oscillator B, also a sine wave that is 3 semitones up from our D that is being played. So 1, 2, 3, which lands at F. And without getting too technical, if we take all of these together, we've got a G7 major chord, which is even more interesting. It's more of a feel that is given to it and more of an edge that is given to it. So it has a harmonic function, just adding to the color palette, so to say, of our song. Let's have a listen to the whole thing. Lesson number 4. Let's have a look at ear candies and some musical elements to make the track a little bit more interesting and also drive up that energy, that tempo a little bit more. Let's have a listen to our section 119 to 127 once more. What we got right here in our instruments section is just a step that's also taken from the Rumble preset pack. Basically just playing one note that complements the groove. Then we've got a growler, basically is also a preset. We've got some frequency modulation, light sounding waveforms, which add to the grid a little bit. And then we've got some effects on here, some chorus, some reverb to give it a little bit more of a three-dimensional feeling. And we rolled off some of the low end, which is then further emphasized with the EQ8. giving it that wide feeling and also adding an element that sounds a little bit darker and a little bit grittier. Next thing, we got our downer, which is also taken from the preset pack. So really nice trippy sample with a mixture of white noise and the pitch being brought down, fill up a bridge between two different parts. And then lastly, we got two elements that highly rely on their pitch being brought up throughout the section of the track. And this is one way you can create tension even within parts, is with these notes rising. It just creates a lot of anticipation and tension inside the track. First up, we got the sine riser, which is just a very simple sine wave. So once again, sine is just one harmonic, one frequency being put out, and it's just a little bit of roll off in the lower frequencies right here with the equalizer, and that sine note is being pitched up with an automation, which you can easily achieve by pressing the configure button and then choosing whatever element you would like to be automated, which in this case is the pitch wheel. Then you click on the pitch wheel, and then you will have the automation curve appear in your arrangement view, and then you can modulate that to your taste. So in this case, this sine gets pitched up by 24 semitones over the course of the section. And then lastly, we've got this noise step, which is also adding some more tension to it because it also slightly rises. We've only got the noise oscillator turned on, but then we've got this band EQ, which is set to a fairly high resonance. So we get one tonal feel of this white noise. It just doesn't sound like white noise. It's got that high pitch in there. Noise by itself doesn't really have any notes in it, doesn't really have any individual harmonics that sound musical. What you need to do here is to create that rising effect is to change the cutoff of the filter. So in this case, the modulation wheel right here is set to the cutoff of the filter, and then that modulation wheel, just like we did before by configure and then pressing the modulation wheel, is automated in the arrangement view, also being pitched up over the course of the section. And then there's a lot of roll off of very high and low frequencies with an EQ8, which is important because if you don't do that, white noise will take up the full spectrum of everything and overshadow your other elements. So altogether, we got all these elements creating a little bit more tension, creating more anticipation, and keeping things interesting. We also use it to foreshadow the end or the beginning of a new section and add drive to the track. Now we had a look at our instrument section. Let's move on to lesson number 5, which is vocals. In a style like Sassari's, which is essentially quite minimal, you don't have so much going on in the instrument section. You've got a lot of groove with the drums, but you still have a lot of space to fill up with, for example, memorable vocals. And Sassari uses a lot of popular vocals. And in our case, we've used a vocal from the PML sample pack, which is a really cool Brit rap vocal. Let's have a listen to the whole thing in context.
Big bass with a rumble, we go straight to your bones like a skeleton key. Dead drop with a rhythmic breeze, resurrection when the bass repeats. Go big bass with a rumble, we go straight to your bones like a skeleton key. Dead drop with a rhythmic breeze, resurrection when the bass rep. Go big bass with a rumble, we go straight to your bones like a skeleton key. Dead drop with a rhythmic breeze, resurrection when the bass repeats. Go big bass with a rumble, we go straight to your bones like a skeleton key. Dead drop with a rhythmic breeze, resurrection when the bass rep. Go big dead, we go bones like a skeleton key. Go big dead, we go bones like a skeleton key. Go big dead, we go bones like a skeleton. Go big dead, we go bones like a skeleton key. Go big dead,
So the good thing is when you have these sort of pre-processed vocals, you have a very clean vocal that can be understood quite easily, that has a lot of energy and also adds to the groove of it. Obviously, this is a matter of taste, you know, depending on the kind of music you want to make, but we have a rapper here that has a really good flow, so it makes the track work way more easily. And this consists of basically two parts. We've got, so to say, the full vocal, which I would say is the original one verse that is rapped and then repeated with some instrument sections, some longer synths that add to the tension that is created in this part, which is also something that Matt Sassari does a lot. He keeps his build-ups fairly simple by just very slowly bringing out some of the elements, turning down some of the elements. So you basically just get a feel of there's a drop coming, but he's not over-exaggerating it. And this is why his tracks sound minimal, and also why they don't feel too overwhelming, you know, too aggressive at the same time. So this section gets repeated to create more tension. Then we have a short bridge, which already introduces the next loop, which is the vocal FX loop. Basically, is taken from the original one, but it's chopped up in the rhythm, just using individual syllables like this.
Go big, dead, we go bones like a skeleton key.
And then this gets repeated again, and you know, once again, it's about finding that sweet spot between repetition and also variation to keep it interesting. You want that repetition to create that hypnotic feel, but also to draw in the listener, so the listener remembers these parts and understands them more easily. This is why repetition works. Then we also need to break up that pattern, so we've cut up some of the syllables in a slightly different pattern every second time this loop gets repeated.
Bones like a skeleton key. Bones like a skeleton. Go big, dead.
And this repetition of the syllable of skeleton adds really nicely to our percussion loop here that is used to end the section. Now, what sort of processing do we have? So for once, we've got our stereo control full range audio effect rack, which uses some delay to create a little bit of a stereo feel. It's just dialed in very slightly with a very, very short decay time, using a ping pong delay because that goes from left to right. And when you have these very short decay times where the echo is basically just bouncing between left and right very quickly, that's what creates a stereo feel. And then lastly, we have a little bit of equalization just to clean up that low mid range, which is the area where a track can get muddy if it's over exaggerated, if you have a lot of different elements that play in that range. So it's wise to keep an eye on that your low mid range around 100, 200 or 300 hertz doesn't get overflown. And then to add to the groove, very important and very clever way to glue a vocal inside the groove is to use a little bit of sidechain compression, which in this case is just provided by a good old compressor that is sidechained to our kick 1, and then that vocal gets ducked down every time our kick hits without with so just very slightly, and this is what you want. Depending on the style of track, of course, you can also exaggerate this a lot more, so you get a lot more of a pumping feeling. But if you just want your vocal to sit a bit more tamed and nicely inside the groove, then it's wise to just start in a little bit and just at the very beginning of the transient of the kick. And this also helps to avoid issues when mastering the track, because if the vocal just lays on top of your loudest element, which is the kick, then that's going to create a lot of volume at the same time every time the kick hits, which can challenge your limiter a little bit too much, creating artifacts. So by dialing down the vocal very slightly every time the kick hits, you're avoiding that problem to a certain extent. Alright, so this has been our 5 production techniques inspired by Matt Sassari. If you want to learn more about this, I highly recommend you get our Tech House PML Sound Pack Pulse, which includes a lot of Ableton projects like these, and also samples and presets for Serum, which you can use to create this more dark and minimal kind of heavy hitting tech house. At the same time, if you want to dive in even deeper, definitely recommended is our Tech House Academy, which has our tutors, including me, give you insight from start to finish on different tracks and a lot of insight on mixing, mastering, harmonies, and melodies. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope to see you very soon.